Hallo, hallo. Hallo? Kunnen jullie me horen? Doet hij het? Doet hij het? Nu doet hij het. So, welcome everybody. Welkom. Fijn dat jullie er zijn op deze gloomy autumn day. So, I'll have to do this in English, though I know most of you are Dutch. So I would like to welcome all of you, people here in the audience and people watching us from home. My name is Nisrine Mbarki. I'm the curator of these conversation programs. And actually I would like to start with a poem of my dear Palestinian friend and poet Asma Azeze. It's in Dutch. Ik ben de honger die de ingewanden van de Engelsen vulde in de Balfour-verklaring. En de verzadiging die onze ingewanden vulde met pijn. Ik ben het verdriet dat in het geweer van mijn grootvader roestte. Ik ben haar blinde kogel die zijn hart raakte. Haar holle buik die hem doodde, hongerig als een vogel. Ik ben de amandelboom die bezweek op de in beslag genomen weide. Haar longen die 40 jaar boven de woestijn dwaalden. Haar vruchten die worden vermalen in de mond van de toerist. Haar geur die het spoor van God heeft afgesneden. Ik ben de helling omheind door militaire bevelen. Ik ben de moed van Christus die erboven vloog als vrijheid. De angst van de spijkers die in haar vleugels werden geslagen. Ik zal lang verzwakken en veranderen in dit alles. Ik zal lang verouderen tot de graanhalm buiten het pad gaat. Daarna zal de weide mij uitspugen naar zijn binnenste. Zijn hongerige vogels zullen mijn hart opeten. Zonder dit stuk vlees, zonder meer, de wereld zal tot rust komen. So, as a writer, translator and curator, I want to take this moment to show my solidarity with the people of Palestine. I speak as an individual, but also with the full and beautiful support of this festival. Thank you, Frank, for this space. I work with and through decoloniality in every aspect of my literary work as a writer of color, as a female writer of color. It's time to speak out and demand active solidarity of organizations and individuals, especially artists internationally. The violence, the killing and the silencing of Palestinian people has reached an unprecedented level. Each day, I wake up wondering whom of my friends has passed and who is still alive, and what question I'm going to message them and then wait for their reply. Sometimes it takes days before I hear from them, and sometimes they never reply. For now, I would like to have 1 minute of silence for the almost 11,000 victims of the genocide on Palestinian people happening right now. Thank you so much. Okay. I'm afraid there is no possibility for me anymore since 1 month to do anything without asking for some awareness of what is happening in Palestine. So, my dear guests, thank you for being here. I would like to introduce all of them. So, my first guest, Canan Marashligil, a multilingual writer, artist, literary translator, and curator based in Amsterdam, and a dear friend. My second guest, Wamba Omar Sharif. I just love saying his name, Wamba Omar Sharif. Is a multilingual novelist, journalist, film critic, born in Liberia. He lived in different Arab countries and is based in Groningen. My third guest, Charlotte van Rode, is a literary translator. She translates from Romanian and German into Dutch. So we won't have any image of Grace Grassley with us, but we will hear her voice. And so I'm going to introduce Gras and Mahmoud to you. So Grassley is a writer, a producer, and a podcaster based in Paris. That's the first voice that we're going to hear. And the second guest, actually we didn't have any image nor voice of the second guest. His name is Mahmoud al-Sha'ir. He's a poet from Gaza. And because he is from Gaza, he couldn't send us any images nor voice record. And we lost all contact since 5 days. But this morning I heard via a friend in Scandinavia that he's still alive. So thank God. So Mahmoud is a poet. He's the co-founder of 28 magazine. That's an Arabic literary cultural magazine, and also based in Gaza. So we're going to start with Grassley, and afterwards we're not going to hear anything for 30 seconds, and that should have been Mahmoud. Okay, enjoy.
Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to have this conversation with you. Thank you, Niskin and Barki, for reaching out. My name is Grace Lee. I am a writer based in France. And in my writing, I explore the subjects of belonging, heritage, transmission, and love. And I love this panel. What is the future of writership? To start with, that's an incredibly tough and passionate question, and I really wish I was there with you. Growing up, I don't remember reading too much, and I never thought that writing would mean so much to me. What I remember vividly is how I could not see myself or my entourage reflected in the literature that I had to read. And this has affected my self-worth and has restricted my horizons. So with this kind of shrunken and dry literary past, I can only dream of a future for writership that is stripped of dominations and unique images. I would like to see all families reflected, and I really see literature as a fight for light and against abusive powers. And of course, this fight is a collective one. The burden is too heavy for one person. Writing in itself is a lonely road, but there's no literature stemming from dead ends or one-way streets. We need intersections and crossroads. We need small country pathways and motorways across borders. They are a necessity. I live in a multilingual family. And I live in a multilingual country, even though France is a little bit in denial about this fact and sees itself in a mirror of lies. I recently wrote a book, a children's book, about the languages of love. It is called Are You Hungry? Because when I was little, I was raised by my grandmother, and she never used words to say I love you, but she always started by asking, "Tongame, are you hungry?" And that was her way of showing how she cared. And all these languages of love and all these languages of words are what I wanted to show in this book, but also what I want to see in literature. And I really hope for languages, all sorts of languages, to be part of the conversation. Hello.
These 30 seconds should have been Mahmoud, but I still would like to quote two things that he wrote in letters sent to friends in the between 2021 and 2022 from Gaza. I'm in Gaza, looking at my grave and worrying about nothing, because I live in a present that I did not choose, and my choice has become a distant dream. I'm trying to approach tomorrow with hope and a belief in the future, but my experience with life here leaves me terrified for my children, Ney and Majd. While I'm overjoyed by their existence, I'm haunted by the fear of destruction, both past and present. Dear guests, so my first question would be, I would like to start by quoting Grasse. Literature as a fight for light and against abusive powers. The fight is a collective one. Could you react on that? And especially how this applies to your work. Let's start by you, Janan.
Thank you, Nisreen. It's great you quote that, because it's exactly what I've written down here about the fight for light and the collective. I find it very important that she talks about that collective, because that's also what happens in a multilingual brain, right? It's already a collective brain, because we have so many voices in our head. I grew up with the Turkish language, with the French language, then English, then Dutch, and then Spanish. So I have a multilingual mind. And not only those languages, all the languages of love, which Grasse mentions, the languages of love for me are Arabic, are Bosnian, are Romanian, are all my friends, all the languages of my friends, they're part of me, even if I don't speak them in the same way I do other languages. And you and I, when we speak, we start in one language and then we move to another, and we end in another language.
So that could happen, by the way, that I just switch.
Toujours.
C'est toujours comme ça.
But sometimes also we use languages, words that we may not know, but we know immediately what we mean because of the love. And this is also something I admire that Grasse mentioned, love and transmission. And the transmission part touches me also as a literary translator, because the work of a literary translator for me is also the one of transmission, but also of carrying. So all these things there's a lot of care, of love, and the problem is that we feel it like this, but the systems in which we live make us believe that those languages don't belong where we are. So it becomes a fight. They turn this into a fight. And all my childhood and my youth, I had to fight to be able to use my languages in my work. Now, no more. I'm done with that. Khalas. You know. But that's the process I've been through with my languages.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I recognize so much what Grace says.
So this fight for the light
Exactly.
against the abusive powers, as you're saying it, it's like a monolingual world against multilingual, diverse entity.
Which is a delusion, because nothing is monolingual or monolithic, or we all are multilingual in some way, even if we don't know. Our whole world, you go out in the street now, you're going to look around you, it's filled with languages. So you hear many languages, you see many languages, and the languages you see in the streets usually are the languages that are not admitted in official places, like in the literature with a big L, or art with a big A, you know? Mm-hmm. Outside the system, these languages exist.
Vamba.
Yes, I came from a world in which certain languages were dominant, English and French. Mm-hmm. And most people, before I was born, were forced to communicate in these languages. And their
in the
own
colonial
mother tongue,
languages.
yes, in the English and French. And their own mother tongues were suppressed. And I think the whole history of African literature of the 20th century was an attempt to reclaim, you know, those languages and those lost stories. And even some of my writings is an attempt, you know, to reclaim those stories, and stories that have not been told, stories that have been lost. And so I grew up speaking not only English, but because of my background, I spoke Arabic, and I had the privilege of growing up in a house, in a huge, with a large family of more than 100 people, and those people came from neighboring countries. So I grew up speaking Mende, that's a language spoken in Sierra Leone, and Gisi, that's another language spoken in Sierra Leone. So 4 languages, African languages, Arabic, English, some French, because I had French teachers at school. And learning these languages broaden your perspective on life, broaden your outlook, and also enables one to see how many stories are out there. Because I was in only hearing African stories. I was reading The 1001 Nights in Arabic, one of the first books that I read. And so I realized that some of the books that I was reading, those African stories, were an attempt by those writers. For example, the novel Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe was an attempt to give voice to a people who had been affected by colonialism. The impact that colonialism had on Africans had never been so eloquently expressed as in that novel. You know, so it was an act of rebellion. You know, it's a fight for life, like Grace Lee said. You know, so I entirely agree with that. And my being here, yes, I have no other choice but to write in Dutch or in English. That's the reality of my life. Mm-hmm. But in doing so, I feel that I have this obligation to share with the Dutch, with the West, those stories that are so very important to me. Yes. You know, those novels, those stories that are not known here. You know, to share those stories.
So, this is a question because you two, well, say what you're saying. We, as let's say Dutch writers, the 3 European writers, Dutch, Belgium, Dutch, Arabic, African, Turkish writers, we do have this experience of the obligation of writing in a European language. For me, it's my first language. For you, it's your first language. For you, it's your writing language. Yeah. So do you think, I mean, that's of course something that I have been dealing with. That's why I refuse to write in one language. For me, it's not possible to do that anymore. So how do you think we are dealing with that actually as the first generation of European language, of European writers in Europe with another background, but still having to write in a colonial language, because that's what we have.
I think it's very challenging because I came here, and when I came here, I spoke Arabic better than any other language, even better than my mother tongue, because I grew up in Kuwait. And so I knew that to be able to feel at ease and at home, this sense of home here, I needed to at least master the Dutch language, the rating form, and at least to find my way in this language. And but while doing that, I was also writing in English. And every time my brother called, my eldest brother who brought me up, he took me to Kuwait. Then I just switched to Arabic, So I was continuously aware of this, of being a stranger to this language and trying to master it. But I had some good examples. I had people before me who had done it and done it well. When I came, one of the first books that I read was The Adelaars by Kader Abdullah, So I said, oh, so there are people who have done it and done it well. So that's why I sent my manuscript to the Geus, because I said, oh, if he can do it, perhaps I can do it too. So it's an ongoing challenge. There's so many aspects of the language that I still don't know. So every time I read a novel in Dutch, I come across words that are new to me. It's the same thing in English, same thing in other languages. So it's a learning process and a challenging one.
So what about you, Jana? Because you write in different languages and translate in different. Your whole being is like multilingual.
I constantly switch languages, and also in my writing, I try to include multilingualism in my writing. But because this is how I feel, and languages are related to emotions. So it's not about grammar, it's not about linguistics, it's about your heart and your soul and your whole body, actually. So how you feel in the world, and sometimes I feel in Turkish, sometimes I feel in Dutch a lot less than in other languages. although I'm finding my way in Dutch as well, thanks to you, for instance, when I read your poetry. And I responded to your poetry in a way I never responded to the Dutch language. And you know this, we discussed this in length. And that has to do with the emotions and also the things I recognize. Something you just said about, you recognized something and you said, oh, I can do this too, I can also write like that. Grace also mentions, like, I wasn't seeing anyone like me in the literature, so I didn't read. But then the moment you start recognizing, so I can say you opened the Dutch language for me. You did that for me. Your poetry did that for me. So it has to do with the stories we tell and the emotions we share and the doors we open for people to be part of the story, even if they are not mastering the language, whatever that also means. What is mastering a language, What does that really mean?
So language is a
talking
means.
about mastering the language, because Marlon James actually won the Booker Prize by writing a novel in Jamaican English and won the Booker Prize. And sometimes I do wonder if a writer of Suriname origin was to write a novel with this way of, with Sranang, Tongon, and all these expressions in Dutch, would such a book win the Libris or something? I don't know. I'm curious. I hope there are writers out there who will challenge the Dutch, establishment and try to write a novel like that. I'm curious,
Yeah.
You have to, you.
Oh, really?
So I would like to ask Charlotte, you as a translator from Romanian and German into Dutch, so how do you feel about this fight do you recognize what Vamba and Janan say, or are you in a different position when translating from a European language to another European language?
Yes, I would say I'm in a different position because my background, however multilingual it is a lot more, has been maybe a little, I don't want to, sounds weird, but it might have been a little bit more easy because I was just, Dutch family, Dutch language, until they dragged me to the United States for 1 year, but that's a different story. But I really like the idea of this collective fight and the idea of that literature, of course, because stories we tell bring us closer, makes it possible for us to be a part of that fight. And I'm really happy that I can contribute to that as a translator. And I can see that everything we've been saying right now is about, language is a tool, is power. And people misuse that, and it's nice to build those bridges when possible. And I feel that role for me is a lot more clear in my work as a translator from Romanian than from German. For the very simple fact that when I translate a book from Romanian, it's a book that I chose and proposed. Whereas when I translate a book from German, it's mostly, I've only translated one book from German, but it was a lot more straightforward in the sense that an editor came to me and said, we want to have this book published and it has to be translated to Dutch, this annoying thing that still has to happen. Can you do that for us? And I was like, yes, I can do that. It's a very different role. Whereas with the stories that I was able to translate from Romanian, I feel like I was bringing a part of that country, history, language fight here.
Because the choice was yours.
Yes. Well, I mean, they don't always say yes.
Oh, we know.
Sadly.
We know. So, Mahmoud al-Sha'ir says in one of his letters that he wrote, while I'm overjoyed by the experience of having little children, I'm haunted by the fear of destruction, both past and present. This is a question for you, Vamba. How did or does literature actually played a role in imagining a world that you left back home? I know it's a big question. And for Janan and Charlotte, so what can literature mean or do in such difficult circumstances? Yes. But I will start with Vamba, with this reimagining what you left behind.
One of my greatest mentors, or someone who inspired me the most, is this Jewish, Polish, American writer, Isaac Bashevis Singer. He fled Poland, and all his writings were an attempt to resurrect or to keep alive that world that had completely been destroyed, So he's one of my inspirations. So my writings are an attempt to resurrect a world that has also been destroyed because of war, because of civil war. I visited Liberia some years ago, and in memory you have some fixed images. All right, this is how my city is looking. I'm driving through, and at a certain point I'm going left, and after walking left, there is this house that belongs to my neighbor. On the right is belonging to this family. And then I come to this compound of more than 8 to 9 houses. And my aunt lives in one. My brother lives in another. So you have this fixed image in your mind.
That's in your memory.
In your memory.
Yeah.
And you've fed on it. You've written about it, as I have done in my novels. And then you go to this place. What was left is no more. And that street of your childhood that you thought was very large and huge, on which you played, and you just see that it's a narrow street, very tiny and very dusty, So it's almost an assault, to that memory. It's a terrible confrontation that you realize that memory will remain forever a memory because the reality is now different. Those who live in that house are gone. The houses are gone. All traces of that memory is not there anymore, and that was very confrontational. So it's like my writings are an attempt to resurrect all those images, and it's remembering things past, to quote the great French writer, yes. So it's or to quote Singer, who was writing about all those things happening on that particular street in Warsaw. I don't know what the streets they exist. I would love to see that street. Yes.
Charlotte and Janan. So, what do you think? What can literature mean in these circumstances? I mean, it's reimagining a world that only lives in our memories very often, at least for the people who had to flee their country or who were brought up in a place that doesn't belong to them.
I first feel extremely lucky. I never had to go through any horror like that, but I do come from a country that has committed lots of massacres, genocide, and horror to lots of minorities. Let's just name the Armenian genocide, what Kurdish people have to go through. So there's a lot of pain and traumas which I do feel and know and work on as a literary translator. There's a reason why I translate Kurdish or Armenian poets. It's not, I have a tendency to go there to try to understand, to also archive. So what is the role for me is we need to also archive that in some way and make it available. And same thing with Belgium. I grew up in a country which has also committed enormous horrors. Think of Congo, which is never talked about. No. I spent my whole scholarship, as I went to school, never ever we spoke about Congo, and we spent like a whole year talking about Russian Revolution. So these things do something to you because the moment you start to learn, you're like, oh, you don't know immediately. Then I moved to the Netherlands and I moved to the Jewish neighborhood. And there, I live in an apartment where a Jewish family used to live. And I sometimes go to give them homage in this new Holocaust monument. They used to be in the Hollandse Schouwburg, the name, and now the Familie Barmhartigheid. I know them, I know their names, I research them. So I always have this impulse to try to understand what happened in the places where I go, where I come from, or that I inhabit. Because I think we cannot, like right now what's happening, for instance, in Palestine, the genocide that is going on there, we cannot disconnect ourselves from that context. It's impossible.
Especially not as a translator, I can imagine.
Especially not. And it drives me a bit crazy that nowadays doing things like this is labeled radical. This is not radical. This is being a human being in the world, understanding we are part of a context and that nothing happens in a vacuum. No writer creates in a vacuum. No translator translates in a vacuum. No artist makes art in a vacuum. We all are influenced by everything that surrounds us. So this is my way of expressing this.
Charlotte, you as a translator from Romanian. So,
sorry.
Or would you like to react on what Janan said? Nee, ga je gang.
I was just wanted to add that it's all part of this collective fight that we were just, yeah. Sorry.
So yeah, actually, I had the same question for you, but maybe I should ask you another question.
No, I think I can, I want to say something about this as well. Is, although it will be a very different answer, but I guess that's good. I have always thought about literature. You were thinking about what can literature do in these kinds of things, or contexts, or circumstances. And I was a historian, or I studied history, and I was working very hardly to become, or I always had dreamt about an academic career and to write a PhD and solve all the big questions. And then somewhere during my studies, I started focusing more on literature from a historical context, and I started understanding more that, at least for me, reading literature and reading the stories that writers write, and that might not be completely true, but they give a historical truth or a literary truth about the world, can explain a lot better to me what it means to have, for example, what it means to be ethnically Hungarian in Romanian, or what it means to have ethnical tensions in a certain area, or what it means to live in a country that used to be a different country and is now suddenly something else. And that's when I also was getting very interested in Svetlana Alexievich, who of course wrote literature that might also be history, but is it maybe literature? And these storytelling techniques that can actually offer us maybe more insights than, you know, history books. And not to say anything bad about history books, because I also love history books. It's just that I think the strength of literature now and always has been to make it more understandable why people do things and how conflicts happen, and how history repeats itself, and how conflicts can be explained more by the experience that has been described. And also why it's important to translate old books as well, and not only new books.
I think there is a famous saying, it's by a German novelist. I think it's like, novels arise out of the shortcomings of history. You know, so yes, that's why we write. Yeah.
So we only have a bit less than 10 minutes left. And so what could the future of authorship be? Same question for translation. When talking about all these urgent things that are going on in the world, and let's say the decoloniality or retelling of stories, is there a future for us? I mean, for me, that's a really important question. Is there a future for us as writers and translators?
Yes.
In this perspective? Yes.
Yeah, obviously.
This is also for the students.
Yes, there's a future. I think we cannot do without.
How does the future look?
We cannot do without stories. One of my great, examples, the great cineast Simbin Usman, you know, the father of African cinema. He said, "We are stories," right? You know, so as long as human beings need stories, I think we will exist, and we are in a privileged position because, you know, especially we who speak many languages. You know, I switched to Dutch. I mean, I can publish my books in Dutch and publish them in English, or translate what I've written in Dutch into English. You know, what a privileged position. I mean, no wonder that Nabokov was so very successful, because he could play with English language and switch into Russian and do all these wonderful things. I think
so it's not just the future for authorship, but for multilingual authors.
Yes, we have the future. So I urge all of you to learn more languages. You know, yes.
Yeah, I strongly agree, because I also think it's not only authorship, also comes with readership, right? So readership is also multilingual. Yes. Even if many publishers still think there's one type of reader, not all of them, thankfully, but some publishers, well, that they speak in terms of markets. I believe we're beyond that already, and lots of them
beyond the markets.
Yeah, I think so. I believe there are lots of the readership is multilingual. The readership is curious about these stories. There are lots of people out there like us who wants to read stories from people like us. So I think that's positive, and so they go hand in hand, authorship and readership.
Charlotte, would you like to add something to that?
Yes, of course there's hope, and of course, there is a future for storytellers and also for translators. I am generally worried about people people read less, and that there is this trend. This sometimes keeps me up at night, but I really liking the vibe here, so I don't wanna be too negative about it. No, of course everybody will be reading, and even if stories aren't always told in the more classical ways. I was talking to a young maker here, maybe she's present and can say something about it, who said that one of her graduate project was actually writing a text together with a video game and like combining those two media. And somebody else said that she wants to write in 4D. So I think there's a lot of future, and I think these young students are creating all kinds of new ways for storytelling, and that will also offer up new possibilities for new kinds of translation. So yes, there's a future and hope.
So we don't have time for questions from the audience, but we will be here. So please don't hesitate if you would like to ask us something. And I would like to conclude with quoting some things that you said, like literature as the literary truth about the world, instead of, the historical narratives that we have heard. And what was it? Novels arise in the shadow of history?
Out of the shortcomings.
Oh, the shortcomings of history. And I really loved the idea of, and I recognize that very much, like going back to where you were born or where you have lived as a child. And you said that's an assault for my memory, and that's so beautiful. And we are the future. We multilingual writers and translators are the future. Thank you very much. We would need a few minutes for our other guests to come and to switch. So please stay seated. I don't know about the projection, but we will see what happens. Thank you for listening. Thank you so much, Janan Marasligil, Wamba Omar Sharif, and Charlotte van Rode. Thank you so much.
So, welcome back. We were supposed to have a longer break, of course, but due to the technical circumstances, we shortened it. I would first introduce my guest. There on my left. Oh, we have a projection. Oh, you try. Okay. This is very funny for the people at home who can see the videos, I assume, right? Yeah. Okay. We cannot, people at home. On your right, on my left, is Paula Erizano. She's a Moldovan writer, a multilingual Moldovan writer. Used to be London-based, moved back to Moldova some years ago. And your first novel had this marvelous title, This is My First Revolution, Steal It If You Want. It's not a novel, actually. It's a non-fiction work. Yeah. Does it work?
Does it work? Yeah. This is My Revolution, Steal It. It was a diary account from these mass protests that we had in 2009 in Moldova against the authoritarian government that had led Moldova for 8 years by that point, and they wanted to go on for another 4 years. But luckily, in Moldova, we have been able to change our governments since independence in '91, and we did manage to have this successful revolution, or change of power. Unfortunately, we had victims of police violence, just like in Belarus. Only there, it happened on a bigger scale. Yeah.
Next to you is Sayonara Stuttgart. Sayonara is the co-founder of the intersectional feminist publisher Chaos. You're a translator as well, an editor, and a poet. And next to me is Gustav Peek. Gustav is a poet. He started out as a poet, actually. A novelist and a film script writer. He's also the board member of the Writers' Union, together with you, Nisreen and Shanan. And you published the pamphlet Verzet, Pleidooi voor Communisme, Resistance, Plea for Communism. Yes. We will be, by the way, my name is Frank Tazelaar. I'm the director of Wintertuin and the artistic director of CELA, the European project for writers and translators. Will we see videos? No, we will listen to voices. I'm sorry. Our other guests, for the people at home, on video, for us, only sound, are Sayumaya El-Sousi. She's a Palestinian poet and researcher. She's based in Scandinavia. And the second voice that we will hear is Rafael Amal Khouri. He's a Jordanian queer transgender documentary playwright, journalist, activist, and a theater artist, and he's based in Berlin. And I suggest we start listening.
Writing still has its unique power of telling the truth and explaining the most difficult life situation. As a writer from Gaza, this small city, which has always been the center of political struggle and where the war never ends there, I was occupied by the idea of explaining to the world that we are normal human beings and we only need to live as other people all over the world. By writing about the details of daily life, which is normal for me, but of course, it's difficult for others to believe that there is a real life there in Gaza. I believe that collective writing is really important, especially if writers from different nationalities write about that same subject. I have done that with my Swedish friends, Hanna Hallgren and Yini Tunidal. After the Third War in Gaza in 2014, we three wrote a long article about our own experience during that war, me in Gaza, and they too with me in contact via Skype. That article and many other collective literary works are able to say and explain many things from different point of views, which I think is very important for the honesty and strength of writing. For me, the more I write, the more I remain a human being, and the more I can concentrate on the pain of suffering of my homeland.
Hi, my name is Rafael Amal Khouri, and I would like to answer the question, what is the importance of working as a collective, if there is any? If we look at the problems that we have nowadays in the world, almost all of them stem from not being able to come together as a collective, whether it's, the pandemic ruining the environment, or wars, or genocide, or climate change. All of them stem from this very rugged individualism that is born out of capitalism. And what's very interesting is that, I'm a playwright, so I come from the perspective of theater. And theater was invented in the Western world, at least, or brought over from Egypt to Greece about 2,500 years ago. And it was at the same time in Greece that coins were invented and money became something very individualistic. And I'm going to read this great quote that I found. The isolated individualism of money was historically unprecedented, and it could take an extreme and shocking form. And that form was tyranny, and in fact, Athens had a tyrant at that time. And the tyrant on stage was always countered by the voice of a chorus, and the tyrant would always have a very tragic ending, and that's why it's called a tragedy. Some examples of that are Oedipus and Creon in Antigone, or Pentheus in the Bacchae. And the chorus remained a very strong thing in theater until almost the 1600s. And it's not a coincidence, because it's at that time that Queen Elizabeth, I'm speaking about in the English language at least, Queen Elizabeth passed a series of laws against poor people. And that meant not being able to congregate in space, in public space. And the people who were affected by that oftentimes were actors, and so acting had to become private, and actors had to work for a lord. They could no longer be independent theater companies working in the public space. They became, belonging to lords and princes, and theater became something very fancy and not for the public. And it's at that time that plays themselves in English no longer have a chorus. The chorus disappears. So when capitalism becomes very strong in Europe, the chorus disappears. And I want us to think about that for a moment and think about maybe the idea that we should bring back the chorus, because the chorus was a voice that always criticized the tyrants, that criticized capitalism, and that emphasized the public good. Thank you so much.
I think this is a very interesting question posed upon us by Rafael. Paula, you just told us backstage when we met each other that you, coming from a Romanian background, Moldovan background, you were used to collective writing guilds or writing groups, and then coming to London, you tried to set one up. Tell us how that went.
Yeah, it didn't go well. So in Romania, we have this tradition ever since the 19th century, I think. Maybe you said it's similar to the French kind of salons. Yeah. I'm not sure exactly.
I'm doubting, yeah.
But what we do have is these circles called cenaclu, which are normally around one kind of famous writer or literary critic who meets his group or her group of writers every week, and they read their work and they criticize and give feedback. So I guess it sounds a bit like a creative writing class, but it's not within the realms of universities. And so when I came to London, and I was talking to the writers I knew, or people writing and working on literary magazines, and explaining them what was happening in Romania and whether we could do something in London that's like that. He said, well, no one would give their time for free in London. But the message about the chorus that we just heard reminded me actually of Ilya Kaminsky, this Ukrainian-born author who now lives in the US, one of the most interesting poets I've ever read, and who revives the chorus, the Greek chorus, in his poetry today to speak about invasion and assault on a town. And one of the reasons why I came back to Moldova is also because of the assault of Russia upon Ukraine, and the fact that that Moldova is also part of this hybrid war, and I felt like I needed to join my collective as in my people in Moldova, but also to join the kind of international conversation on it.
So before we go deeper into the chorus, which I think is a marvelous idea, I just want to talk about organization and capitalism and not doing it for free. Especially for the young writers present here, Sayonara, you organized yourself together with a collective. What is the way to go about, and why did you start, for instance, Chaos? What is the way to go about when you, as Sayuma said, want to organize yourself internationally, write together, concern yourselves with the same themes or the same subjects? What is your strategy?
We didn't have a strategy. To be honest, we were just very naive. We were at a talk at a bookstore called Savannah Bay, and it was a talk about feminist publishing houses in the 80s, uitgeverij Sarah. And we realized there was anything like this anymore. So we thought, let's start a publishing house and let's make it feminist. And we didn't have any strategy. We just talked about names, and then everything just rolled, and we just rolled behind it. So we just like the monster of Frankenstein, and we're just like trying to make it work.
And do you recognize what Paula said? It's very difficult to get this started without any money.
We didn't have any money. We did it for free, so it was like voluntary work. And we also had day jobs. So yeah, we couldn't pay the authors or the translators. We had to borrow money, and everything that came in went straight to the authors and to the prints and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, production.
This is a form, of course, of resistance. Gustav, you wrote a pamphlet about resistance. What is resistance for an author other than organizing like a publishing house or a magazine? How would that look? What would that look like? Resistance by authors.
I think it starts with truth, with the acceptance of things as they are, and then what? What you're gonna do? I think that's the basis of everything. Everything new has got to be true, because the status quo doesn't want you to evolve, doesn't want you to create places that are unexpected and unimaginable. So we as artists, we should always concern ourselves with the previously unimaginable, with the unthinkable, because that is what all future is. You have to accept that the future is unthinkable, and only then you will start to realize which way you might go. You know, a guy like me, 200 years ago, the colonial powers in Indonesia could seize me by the arm and could sell me. And to them it was unthinkable that a guy like me could sit here and speak to you and write his books, make his art. So I'm the unthinkable, but I'm real. So you always have to keep in mind the unthinkable.
Yeah. So Chanel was saying something very interesting, I think, in the previous conversation. We have to go beyond the market. So we have this market, of course. But how do we go beyond this market?
Well, we can't do it alone. No, capitalism is formidable. So, well, we have to start somewhere, and you start with movements. You start with political parties. You start with collective action, gaining force, gaining importance. Young writers ask me, where do you start? Join anything. Become a member of something. Pay your dues. Invest the collectives in which you believe, so the people who are part of that collective can do the work. And for that work you need money. So it's about money and time and dedication, and it's tough and it's no fun, but it has to happen.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, join anything, including anonymous alcoholics, or?
Well, if
something for the cause, probably.
Yeah, if that's a collective that can gain democratic traction, yeah, sure.
So your need going to London, your need for this collective was not answered. Did you solve it in any way?
Just to go back to anonymous alcoholics, or Chuck Palahniuk actually wrote a book based on it by joining various groups like these. So it can work, actually. Your advice for any group, right? Whether it's a good or bad experience. I mean, I don't want to criticize London too much, because I also love it, and it's also an adopted motherland. And this is where I became an adult, and this is where I made lifelong friends, and I had better education than I would have been able to have in Moldova or Romania. But I went to London with this idea that I am going to a megapolis, to a place where decisions are made, to a cultural center from the margins. And I think now I don't see the world in the same way anymore, and I see London more as, although it has given a lot to me in very many ways, and still my relationship with it is long distance but still active. We haven't broken up. I still write for a lot of international publications that are based in London. But at the same time, I did feel that the kind of idea of a cultural center that I went with their slightly morphed, and now I realize that it's like people who make money are welcome or like are able to stay in London, and a lot of artists who are not amongst the 1% or 2% that makes millions out of their art isn't really able to live in London because, well, in order to have a house there, you need millions. So it is quite exclusive in that way. And I went back to Moldova. I don't know whether this is forever or not, because today's world, just like it is multilingual, but it's also I don't know, so dynamic, and you can. A lot of people move a lot, so I'm not sure where my next moves will be. Right now, I'm in the Netherlands, and I'm loving it. But I did feel like I had a kind of duty as well as an opportunity by returning to Moldova. Because of the war in Ukraine, Eastern Europe has become a center of attention in a way in which it hadn't been before. For the first time, the stories of our parents, of our grandparents, are finally being heard. So earlier, our colleagues spoke about imperialism, about colonialism. I find that framework really useful to understand what happened in Eastern Europe and what happened with Moldova and Ukraine and other countries in the region. We have had tens of thousands of people deported from Moldova during the Soviet era. We had state-organized famine, just like in Ukraine, and my grandpa lost 3 of his siblings who were children and his father during that famine. So we have all of these stories and traumas that were not heard before. And for the first time, since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the world seemed to listen and to understand what we have been going through and our desire to break free from the oppressive power of the Kremlin. And I wanted to use this opportunity, this light that appeared in the middle of darkness through these cracks, and to go back to Moldova and report and become one of the voices that tells the story of Moldova, so that it wouldn't be just American journalists parachuting to Moldova and reporting on the ground. Yeah, that was my thinking.
Yeah. So the duty that you speak about, is that recognizable for you, Sayonara, that you think I have as a writer, as a literary worker, I sense this duty?
Yes and no. I do sense this duty, but I'm also very tired right now.
Okay. So it's a tiring duty.
Yeah, but I'm so tired that I don't have the energy to do it anymore. It feels very lonely. Also, well, there are people around me, but it's just events keep happening, and it's the same story in a different country all over again, and nothing changes. And yeah, I'm kind of giving up at this moment, right? To be honest, yeah.
So this silenced me a little, so I'm not very quick now. Right now.
Not very hopeful. I'm sorry.
No, but we are not here to sell hope, right? We are here for a conversation. This is a real position, I think. Do you, Gustav? Do you recognize this being tired?
Sure. This huge fatigue. This experience of these endless and predictable cycles of
They're predictable, yeah, exactly.
It's too predictable. So how do you keep yourself together? How do you keep yourself fighting? The word was mentioned. I'm not a big believer or creature of hope. What I can provide is how can I put this? I've always felt that there was purpose. I've always felt that there was meaning, and I've always been hungry for love. A word that was also mentioned. And as long as I'm alive, I will seek out venues for love, because that's natural. That's what it means to be a human being. I think the only thing that can lift me up from this really crushing fatigue is the notion that love exists, and that as an artist I can get glimpses of this love, of this ongoing carrying the dynamic between human beings, which is natural and automatic. I've always been someone who is, strange to say, I've always been angry. I've always been dissatisfied, and that anger helps me to keep my spirits up. It's an ongoing fight, but as long as maybe I'm a fish. As long as I feel that I'm swimming, I have to keep swimming. And there's this, nobody lives in a vacuum. And I had this teacher. I had this teacher in primary school. And he once said to my dad, who was quite angry about this statement he made, but this teacher said about me, that boy can do anything. Nobody had said something like that about me or to me. And that did not give me a burden, that did not burden me, that didn't force a sense of duty on me, but it liberated me. It made me feel alive, and it made me feel human, and I have to answer that call. But am I tired? Yes, Jesus Christ. I'm so tired, but I've been tired all my life.
Same.
Yeah, and you develop. This is a long speech, I guess, about coping strategies. When you are suppressed, when so many areas of your existence are suppressed by systems, you develop coping strategies. First, you start to suppress stuff in yourself. But then, when you try to write, you can only write true if you're true about yourself, about the truth about the things you suppress in yourself. And you start to write freely and better if you are honest about all the shit you suppress in your own life, in your psyche. You get sadder, but also wiser.
This truth as also a force, I think, of love. Maybe in literature it's a more allegorical truth. We were listening to Raphael, and he was, as I think, saying something very important. We've been talking about capitalism. We've been talking about the fatigue that you feel in the struggle. We've been talking about the market and about the duty. This is how we organize ourselves and our lives and our friendships and our professional engagements. But he was talking about something else. He was talking about the work itself. So not being focused on the individual. And he was mentioning, I think, a very interesting thing, that the rise of capitalism and the disappearance of the chorus from literature go hand in hand. Now, I have this hope, sorry to introduce this again, that reading, you mentioned before, Svetlana Alexievich. I will rely on you.
For the hope, you can rely on me.
Yeah.
It's a survival mechanism.
Yeah, it's also one
of
those mechanisms. Yes, in Eastern Europe you need some, yeah. But reading Svetlana Alexievich, Evaristo Tokarczuk, I sense a literature that is no longer a means of a psychoanalyzed individual to express himself, mostly himself, but a means for society to express itself. Do you somehow recognize this hope? All of you, yeah. And do you also miss the chorus, as Raphael said?
I was actually going to comment on the chorus because one quote from Elena Ferrante that I really love is that she says actually literature is a collective work. It's a myth that this is an individual, lonely endeavor. It's always the product of two communities: the community of writers who have written until you and from whom you take your words, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to use words. Or I guess here I would also add oral storytelling. My love for literature came from my grandma, who was a literature teacher, and she was so talented at telling stories. And that was my first kind of introduction to literature. And so there's that community, and then there's also your community, your immediate community that you interact with and whose experiences you witness, you are part of, and you see and you hear. As it was told earlier in the panel, we are stories ourselves, and all of these stories are always mingling in what we write. It's never just one kind of atomized individual that produces a book. And that's why you get, women who get divorced from their husbands because they wrote everything about them in their books, thinking of Knausgaard, for instance. This is another proof that actually the chorus has not disappeared. It's always there. It's just that there's only one name on the cover.
How do you feel about that, Sayeda?
I agree.
Yeah.
Especially as an editor. You don't write alone, I think.
So you said you as an editor are part of this collective work of this chorus?
Yeah, because you're not only editing the work, you're also a therapist.
Therapist?
Therapist, sorry. Yeah. You're everything. You're a cook. Yeah.
And Gustav, in your novels, is there a chorus? I would say yes, but
yes, yeah. I would just one. Something is nagging me about this idea of a chorus. These many voices, which in the end say the same. To be a true chorus would end up in chaos. Everyone speaking for themselves towards a common. One should always be careful with too much form, with tropes. In ancient Greek society, you had the chorus, the tyrant was being criticized, so the daily reality of living under a tyrant could be processed. It's a bit like Hollywood. It gives you a sense that the underdog can win. So we deny that we're ruled by systems and governing structures. So my latest book was a novel set in the 16th century, and it didn't have a main character. So I believe in multi-voice more than chorus.
But nowadays, living as we do, this multi-voice, there is a form dictated by the algorithm. We all agree with ourselves on our timeline. So how to escape this? How to build up? I think we are talking about collective work. We are talking about the responsibility that we have as writers. But I also think that we are talking about building solidarity. So how to build solidarity when we are confined to, and maybe that's a question first to you, Paula, when we are confined to being even more individual than we already are?
Oh God, that's a difficult question. I don't know if we live in bubbles. So I spend a lot of time on Twitter because that's my job, and I don't know, since Elon Musk bought Twitter and turned it into X, I keep having these people that I unfollowed specifically on Twitter reappear. So I don't feel like I live in a bubble. fortunately or unfortunately. And then, the more the more visible a post becomes, the more harassment and stupid comments you get and hate and so on. So how do we build solidarity in this world? Maybe by telling our stories that move. One Moldovan writer that's actually translated into Dutch by Charlotte Tatiana Tsibulak, she said something that really moved me at a literary festival in Moldova in May. She said, "No one will write our stories instead, in our place. We have to write our stories." And she's managed to do it in a very powerful way. And that's because she she looks for authenticity in her writing, and the reader can sense authenticity. And I don't know, it's a mix of skill and the stories that you tell. But I think art is a great way of building solidarity, and it's a great way for other people to understand other people's experiences. There are so many I don't know, I can't know what it's like to be I don't know, a trans person, for instance, because I've never had that experience myself. But when I read a first person essay that a trans person wrote about their difficulty with being in their body, I felt like I understood it a bit more. And I think this is the work that we have to do as writers, in addition to joining anonymous alcoholics or political parties.
In addition, yes, and it was said by Sumaya in the, I would say, video, but in the audio fragment that we heard, that writing keeps her human. Vamba agrees, I hear. This fatigue, I'm sorry, I'm coming back to this. Somehow, I'm not sure if hope is the answer. But if there would be an answer, what would it be?
I think revolution is an answer.
And revolution is the answer, yeah.
As long as you're capitalist, as long as sorry, I'm losing my words. As long as you're capitalism, we're lost. There's yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, from the perspective of us working in literature, from writers, editors, translators, what organization or self-organization do we need, from your point of view, to enable this revolution? I mean, talking about hope, looking at, for instance, the Dutch elections coming up or the situation in the world right now, I'm a bit lost.
Yeah. Keep writing pamphlets, like Gustav. Mm-hmm. Keep writing poetry. Make it short, make it direct, and send people into the streets.
Gustavo, how do you feel about this? You wrote this pamphlet.
Yeah. It's election time, and that's real and that's serious. So artists, they need life and time, and we all know which political parties are more inclined to give artists life and time. So if you don't vote on the most anti-capitalist political party, you're doomed, and that's no exaggeration. So that's real, and you have to be aware of that. And artists shouldn't be coy. When they support a political party, they should be open about it. They should be much more politically overt to emphasize that connection between life, art, and politics. So I can make these huge statements about art, but they don't mean anything if politics will not give me time and life.
So I agree, and I think from your perspective in Eastern Europe, this is a very urgent matter.
What is
being active and being outspoken at this point?
Yeah. I think I struggle from Eastern Europe to see capitalism as this kind of soul monster that needs to be destroyed, because we also had communism that didn't go very well in many ways. In
maybe it's
Eastern
more
Europe.
about men and power than
Patriarchy.
Yeah.
That's a different word. Yeah. So also the way I see our contemporary world is more of a mix of all of these different models. We have capitalist structures as well as socialist structures. What we name capitalism in Europe is not the same as the capitalism that the US has or China has or Russia has. So I don't know. I think it's all as a journalist, I find it always useful to go into the concrete details of every such system, and maybe because of my kind of disappointment with the way my first revolution or so-called revolution was stolen by these corrupt oligarchs who took away our chance of joining Europe earlier, but luckily now we have another window of opportunity. Because of that, and because I wrote this novel, about early Soviet revolutionaries who made the USSR the first country in the world to legalize abortion, for instance, or they legalized homosexuality. They created kindergartens in factories and so on. And then Stalin came and he abolished a lot of that. And so I don't trust this kind of big idea of a revolution as the one solution that will solve all our problems. I don't think there is one solution that will solve all our problems. I think the fight is ongoing, and we need to work step by step into and try to solve the little problems that we see are part of the kind of big issue. Sorry to be the reactionary voice here, but this is coming from I guess from experience and from my work and research.
Yeah. Do you get that revolution is a multiple message, or what is a revolution? If you would say after the revolution,
what happens then?
Yeah.
Utopia, but
yeah.
I hope there will be a world where we really can take care of each other. It's not only I'm only worried about what's happening in my street and in my garden, as the Dutch say.
Yeah. Care.
I do get what you're saying, Paula.
Yeah.
I do get,
Taking care of each other as a central effort. Gustav, how do you feel about that?
That's only natural.
Yeah, you would think so.
You would think so, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but so if that is sabotaged, so then of course it's harder for us to take care of each other. I always try to identify three enemies. You have capitalism, you have the patriarchy, and you have white dominance. And these three, they force loneliness upon you. And but that's not who we are. That's not what's findable, as you should say, in our DNA. What exists between us as human beings, our social relations, are the true fabric of our future, and we have to keep emphasizing on that. It is about the deep felt connection between you and me. I am you, and you are I, and that's real. I can't make it anything else. That's real. And as long as we keep justify political leaders who denied that truth, we are miles behind of our true destiny.
Mm. I'm signaling. I have to round it up. Well, I'm not really sure if I'm capable of doing that. I don't think so. But I will try by quoting Ali Smith in a recent public interview, speaking about the responsibility of writers that we spoke about. And she told the following. She said, and here she starts talking, "A few years ago, I heard John Berger speak. Someone said to him, 'John Berger, you wrote A Seventh Man, one of the most important books of this decade about the movements of people across the world for economic migrancy. What can you tell us right now about what's happening in the world and with these people decades later?' John Berger," Ali Smith said, a great thinker, didn't speak for a minute and a half and just sat on the stage. And then he said, "I have been thinking about the storyteller's responsibility to hospitality." And that's all he said. Maybe that's something to end with? Gustav, can you find yourself in this?
Sure. All art is open. That's why it can reach any stranger. You know, a writer can sit behind a desk and will write something, if it's true, that a complete stranger can understand and accept. So all art is open. So yeah, it's true.
Thank you for rounding it up for us. Which was perfect. Yeah, give. As Nisreen said before, we don't have time for questions from you, but we will be, all of us, will be here and at the bar. So please approach us if you have any questions. If not, don't. I have one thing to say about the program is that Hanan Faour will be in the kas outside with her project between hummus and fly, which is very interesting and very delightful to visit. I would like to thank Paula, Sayonara, and Gustav for contributing to this, in my opinion, very valuable conversation. And thank you so much, Nisreen, for being the curator and taking care of this, which was an honor to be part of. Thank you very much. Thank you.